The desert wind howled across the cracked pavement of Route 90, carrying with it dust, heat, and the low, distant growl of something unnatural. Captain Elias Monroe crouched behind the half-wrecked shell of an abandoned SUV, his eyes sweeping the horizon through scratched combat goggles. The sun had begun its descent, turning the world a molten orange. Behind him, the remnants of Bravo Recon's squad tightened their grips on their rifles. "Still nothing," Corporal Dax replied, voice low as he shook his head, withdrawing the satellite communicator from his vest. "Command's gone dark. No signal. It's like we've been cut off from the world." Monroe nodded grimly. They had been sent on a recon mission to investigate a communication blackout in Sector 12, a quarantine zone since the outbreak. What they found instead was devastation. Whole towns emptied, vehicles burned out in the street, bloodless bodies curled up under broken glass. And now, no contact with Central Command. 8 soldiers had entered the zone 3 hours ago. Now only 5 remained. Private Carla Reyes kept watch from the rooftop of a nearby gas station, her sniper rifle poised, eyes constantly scanning. "Movement," she hissed into her radio. "West side. 2, no, 3 figures coming over the ridge. Shamblers. Slow. Probably infected." "Rules of engagement?" asked Sergeant Marcus Bell, gripping his shotgun tighter. "Engage only if necessary," Monroe replied. "We stay hidden. Stay alive." But staying hidden in a dead land was no easy task. Since entering the zone, the infected seemed to move in unpredictable packs, sometimes silent, other times howling with rage. Worse, they had seen evidence of a new kind. Smarter. Organized. In one town, a barricade had been reinforced from the inside, by something intelligent. Reyes fired a single suppressed round. One of the shamblers dropped mid-step. The other 2 staggered forward, oblivious. Bell moved silently to intercept, knife in hand. Moments later, the 2 threats were down. "We need to move," Monroe ordered. "We're exposed here." Their plan was simple: reach Fort Banner, a nearby military outpost, and re-establish contact. But maps were outdated. Roads were blocked. And the infected, they were changing. As they moved through the outskirts of a shattered residential block, a radio crackled. Not theirs. It came from an abandoned police cruiser, partially buried under rubble. Monroe paused and signaled the team to take cover. The static burst again, and then a voice, broken, trembling. "Hello? Anyone out there? This is Officer Grant of Metro PD. I'm trapped in the Civic Center. They're everywhere." The signal vanished. Bell's jaw clenched. "Another trap?" Reyes shook her head. "Could be real. But it's off route." Monroe made the call. "We check it out. If there's a survivor, we bring them. If it's a trap, we deal with it." The squad moved with caution, sticking to alleyways and keeping low. As they neared the Civic Center, signs of chaos became clearer: bullet holes in walls, claw marks on metal, broken doors. And then the first body, a child-sized infected, curled up on the steps like it had fallen asleep mid-hunt. Its head had been bashed in, but not by gunfire. Blunt trauma. Close combat. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rot and mold. Papers fluttered in the stale breeze from shattered windows. Footsteps echoed above. Reyes raised her weapon. "Second floor." "Bell, Reyes, with me," Monroe whispered. "Dax, cover the rear." They climbed cautiously. As they reached the landing, the air shifted. Someone, or something, was nearby. Suddenly, a chair toppled and a man burst from a side room, wild-eyed and pointing a pistol. "Don't move," he shouted. Monroe didn't blink. "Officer Grant?" The man's face crumpled with relief. "Thank God. I thought I was the last." He was ragged, dehydrated, and bleeding from the leg, but alive. Monroe approached slowly. "We'll get you out. Can you walk?" Grant nodded shakily. "Yeah. I think so. Before they could move, a piercing screech echoed through the building, high, guttural, unnatural. They followed me here, Grant whispered. They're not like the others. They set traps. They watch. The building trembled as something slammed into the lower-level door. Monroe turned to the squad. Positions. This just became a fight for survival. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon. And with nightfall, the true horrors would come alive. To be continued. Would you like me to continue with part 2 next? The pounding at the Civic Center's front door grew louder, heavy, rhythmic, unnatural. Each slam vibrated through the floor like a warning, as if the building itself knew what was coming. Captain Monroe quickly ushered Officer Grant down behind a toppled filing cabinet. Reyes, cover the stairwell. Bell, reinforce the entry with anything you can find. Reyes dropped to one knee and aimed her rifle down the dark stairwell, her scope picking up faint heat signatures. Multiple contacts, fast movers. Not shamblers. Bell dragged an old steel desk against the stairwell door, his chest rising and falling faster now. You ever seen runners move like this? No, Monroe replied. And I've seen a lot. Dax's voice crackled over the comms from downstairs. Captain. Something just slipped past the front, didn't use the door. I heard it moving inside the vents. Monroe turned pale. Fall back to the second floor. Now. Suddenly, the ceiling above them groaned, and something long and thin scraped across the tiles. Everyone froze. A metallic click echoed, like claws tapping on aluminum. Reyes followed the sound upward with her rifle, every muscle taut. Then, silence. It was worse than the noise. Without warning, a vent grate above Dax gave way. Something fast and thin burst from the darkness, pale, sinewy limbs, vacant gray eyes, and a twisted jaw lined with sharpened teeth. It didn't growl. It didn't scream. It just moved. Dax fired instinctively, unloading a burst from his rifle as he rolled out of the way. The creature shrieked as it slammed into the wall, then vanished down the corridor at impossible speed. What the hell was that? Dax shouted, breathless. Not a regular infected, Reyes muttered, eyes wide. It moved like it knew what it was doing. Monroe stayed focused. These aren't mindless biters anymore. They're evolving. Learning. They formed a tight formation around Officer Grant, pushing toward the back stairwell. But the air felt heavier now. Like the building had been watching. Waiting. More skittering sounds echoed from the vents, and doors in the hallway ahead began to creak open. Monroe halted the squad. New plan. Bell, grenade. Hallway clearance. Bell nodded, retrieved a flash grenade, pulled the pin, and tossed it forward. It detonated with a deafening pop, light blasting through the corridor. Screeches erupted from the shadows, and two infected darted from a side room, their eyes blinded, limbs flailing. Reyes picked them off with clean headshots. Move! Monroe ordered. They made it to the back stairwell, but as they started to descend, another noise chilled them, this one mechanical. A soft beep beep beep. Tripwire. Dax yelled, diving backward. An explosive charge went off just below the stairs. The stairwell collapsed, and flames licked upward, blocking their path. They were trapped. Reyes coughed through the smoke. They rigged the stairs? That's military thinking. Monroe narrowed his eyes. Or they watched long enough to copy it. A sudden crash shook the building as the front door gave way downstairs. Growls and snarls filled the air, at least a dozen voices, maybe more. Monroe turned toward a shattered window at the end of the hall. No way out, Bell said grimly. There's always a way, Monroe replied. We rappel. Dax, line. Dax was already removing a coil of tactical rope from his pack. We'll have to go one by one. Too narrow. Reyes covered the hallway while Dax secured the line to a beam and tossed it out the window. Grant went first, weakly but steadily sliding down to the alley below. Bell followed next, then Reyes. As Dax hooked in, Monroe gave him a firm nod. "I'm right behind you." But as Monroe turned to follow, a low hiss came from the hallway. A figure stood there, one of the new infected, taller than the rest, wrapped in what looked like scavenged riot gear, eyes locked on Monroe with unsettling intelligence. It didn't charge. It waited. Monroe stared back, heart pounding. He slowly clipped the rope onto his harness, never breaking eye contact. Then the creature moved, one step at a time, slow and deliberate. It was studying him. Monroe gave one final look and leapt from the window. As he descended, the last thing he saw above was the infected tilting its head, and watching. On the ground, Reyes pulled him away from the wall as snarls echoed above them. "We need to go now," she said. Monroe didn't argue. The lost squad vanished into the night, outnumbered, outmatched, and now hunted by enemies that didn't just bite, they planned. The shadows swallowed them as they sprinted into the darkened alley, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust and debris. Monroe's mind raced, but his instincts kept him focused. Survival first. Everything else, answers, revenge, would come later. The squad skidded around a corner, their breath heavy, hearts pounding. Dax was the first to speak. "Captain, that thing, back there. It's different. It was waiting for you." Monroe grimaced. "It's smart. Too smart." Officer Grant, who had been quietly following them, broke into a cough. "They've adapted. They're hunting you." Monroe glanced at Grant. The officer had seen too much, but his eyes were sharp, his mind still intact. He wasn't just another survivor, he was a witness to the madness. "Can't argue with that," Monroe muttered. "But we need to keep moving. They know we're here now." Reyes scanned the alleyway behind them, her rifle raised. "We can't outrun them forever." Bell, ever the pragmatist, looked up at the crumbling structures overhead. "We need to find shelter. Something defensible." Monroe nodded. "Agreed. We'll head for the old subway station. It's a few blocks down. We can make it." The subway station was their best bet, an underground network, long abandoned, but still intact. It offered cover, and more importantly, it offered a way out. Or so they hoped. They moved in tight formation, keeping their senses sharp. Every flicker of movement in the corner of their eyes made their weapons snap to attention. Every gust of wind, every distant scream, sent them into overdrive. As they turned the corner onto 7th Street, the familiar sight of the subway entrance came into view, a rusted metal gate with a peeling sign, "Entrance closed. Danger below." "It's a risk," Monroe said, "but it's the best one we have." They descended into the station, one by one, the air growing colder as they moved deeper underground. The flickering lights above them cast eerie shadows on the cracked tiles, and the smell of mildew and decay hung thick in the air. Monroe took the lead, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Stay close. Keep your radios on." Dax held up the rear, still scanning their surroundings. "I don't like it. Too quiet." Suddenly, there was a sound. Faint at first, like a whisper on the wind, then louder, clearer. A shuffling noise, coming from deeper within the station. Reyes tensed, her grip tightening on her rifle. "It's them." "Get ready," Monroe ordered. The squad spread out, moving silently, their eyes flicking to every corner, every shadow. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable, the telltale shuffle of infected feet. Then came the hiss. Not from one, but from several. Monroe signaled for them to take cover. They ducked behind the concrete pillars and benches, weapons raised. A low growl echoed through the station. Monroe's pulse quickened. "Hold your fire. Wait for the signal." For a long moment, all they could hear was the soft shuffle and the growls, slowly surrounding them. Monroe could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Something wasn't right. They were too quiet. Too organized. Then the screech came, a loud, terrifying shriek that rang through the station. The infected had found them. Monroe's heart skipped a beat as the first wave of creatures appeared at the far end of the platform, dozens of them, moving with terrifying purpose. But they weren't moving like the mindless shamblers they had encountered earlier. No. These things were different. Monroe watched in horror as one of them raised a hand, slow, deliberate, and pressed it to a broken vending machine. The creature's hand curled into a fist, and the machine clanged as though responding to its touch. The infected had learned. "They're communicating," Monroe muttered. It wasn't just the mutated forms that were terrifying. It was their intelligence. One of the creatures broke away from the group, its eyes scanning the area as it shuffled toward their hiding spot. Monroe motioned for his team to stay still. The creature paused, its head snapping toward their direction. Time seemed to freeze. Then, it moved again, slowly, deliberately, closer. Monroe's finger hovered over his rifle's trigger. His chest tightened. He had to act. The squad's survival depended on it. Before the creature could get any closer, Monroe opened fire, and the shot echoed through the station. The creature's head snapped back, and it collapsed to the floor with a sickening thud. But that was all the signal the others needed. A cacophony of shrieks erupted as the remaining infected charged forward, leaping and crawling in an almost coordinated frenzy. "Fall back!" Monroe yelled. The squad scrambled to their feet, firing as they retreated toward the deeper tunnels of the subway system. Dax covered the rear, his rifle barking as more infected poured into the station. Reyes and Bell followed Monroe, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "We need a way out," Bell shouted, his voice strained with panic. Monroe's mind raced. They were trapped. Surrounded. But there had to be another exit. There had to be. Ahead, a faint light flickered from an old service door. "That's our way out," Monroe said, pointing toward it. "Move!" The squad charged forward, guns blazing as the infected closed in. They burst through the service door into a narrow tunnel, and the last of the infected following them were left behind in the station. But the tunnel was far from safe. The further they went, the darker and colder it became. The walls closed in, and with every step, the sense of isolation grew. "Don't stop," Monroe ordered, his voice low but firm. "Keep moving. We're not safe yet." Behind them, the echo of infected shrieks faded into the distance, but Monroe knew they weren't out of danger. They were just getting started. The tunnel was tight, the air thick with the scent of rot and dust. Their footsteps echoed loudly in the confined space as they moved deeper underground. Monroe kept his pace steady, but every few steps, he glanced over his shoulder. The feeling of being followed had never been so strong. The dim light from their flashlights flickered as they advanced, casting eerie shadows against the jagged walls. The sound of their breathing was the only thing louder than their footsteps. Dax was the first to speak. "We're not going to make it out alive if we don't find an exit soon." Monroe didn't respond at first, his mind racing. His job was to protect the squad, but the weight of this mission, the weight of what was out there, was more than anyone should bear. Still, he pushed forward, his jaw clenched. "We'll find a way out," he finally said, his voice low but firm. Reyes glanced at him, brow furrowed. "You said it yourself, Captain. They're learning. Adapting. And now we've got them on our tail. We can't keep running forever." "I know," Monroe replied. "But right now, staying alive is the only thing that matters. We keep moving." Behind them, Bell was muttering to himself. "We've seen infected that can think. We've got machines and killers out here, and the only thing we've got is this damn tunnel." He kicked a piece of debris, the noise sharp in the silence. Monroe wasn't sure if Bell was trying to reassure himself or vent his fear. Either way, it didn't matter. They had no choice but to keep going. The tunnel split into two paths ahead. Monroe stopped, scanning the options. One path was narrower, leading further into the heart of the city, while the other seemed to wind up toward an older, forgotten service exit, possibly closer to the surface. "We take the narrow path," Monroe decided, already moving toward it. What? Belle's voice rang out in disbelief. We're gonna get trapped in there. It's a dead end. It's our best chance, Monroe said, turning to face him. We don't know what's down that other path. But we know that exit's blocked, and if they've been watching us this whole time, they might have rigged the other way too. Belle's face twisted in frustration, but he didn't argue. The rest of the squad followed Monroe without another word. The narrow path twisted and turned, the walls squeezing closer with each step. The tunnel felt like it was closing in on them, and the temperature dropped as the air grew stale and heavy. Suddenly, a sound interrupted the silence, a faint tapping from ahead. Reyes held up a hand, signaling the others to stop. She strained to listen, her rifle tight in her grip. The tapping grew louder, and it was no longer faint. It was sharp. Rhythmic. Almost mechanical. Monroe's heart skipped a beat. It's them. No, Reyes whispered, her eyes narrowing. That's not the infected. It sounds like... Before she could finish her sentence, the sound stopped, and they were plunged back into the heavy silence of the tunnel. Dax's grip tightened on his weapon. What the hell was that? Monroe motioned for them to keep moving. Stay alert. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air felt, as if the very walls of the tunnel were pressing in on them. The dim beam of their flashlights reflected off strange markings on the walls, lines and symbols that Monroe hadn't seen before, but something about them felt familiar. They're drawing us in, Belle muttered. Monroe didn't respond. He wasn't sure if Belle meant it literally, but that was the thought that kept creeping into his mind. They were being herded. The creatures, whatever they were now, had been luring them here. It was as if they knew the squad would eventually find their way to this very spot. And when they did, they would be waiting. Another noise echoed from the darkness ahead, a low, guttural growl. It was too deep, too resonant to be a simple infected. Monroe held up his hand to stop the squad, his eyes scanning the dark ahead. Ready, he said. They rounded a bend in the tunnel, and there, in the flickering flashlight beams, a figure appeared. It was tall, much taller than the infected they had seen before, its head resting at an unnatural angle. Its eyes were black voids, no longer human. But what struck Monroe most was the faint outline of what appeared to be armor, scattered pieces of military equipment stitched into the creature's grotesque form. It was a hybrid, human, zombie, and something else entirely. Dax barely managed to whisper, it's wearing the remnants of our soldiers. Monroe's stomach twisted in disgust, but he forced his voice to remain steady. That thing isn't human anymore. No, Reyes muttered. It's hunting us. The creature took a slow step forward, then another, each movement deliberate, as though it had calculated the exact moment to strike. Before Monroe could give the order, the creature lunged. It was fast, too fast. Dax barely had time to raise his weapon as the creature barreled into him. He was thrown back with a sickening thud, crashing into the wall, his rifle spinning out of his hands. Reyes immediately fired, hitting the creature's chest. But it didn't stop. The bullet didn't even seem to faze it. Monroe grabbed a flashbang from his vest and tossed it, the explosion temporarily disorienting the creature. It screeched, stumbling back, but it was already recovering. Move! Monroe yelled, grabbing Dax by the arm. We need to fall back, now. Reyes covered them with more gunfire, but Monroe could see it was useless. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and out of time. The creature wasn't just hunting them, it was trying to trap them. And with every passing second, it was getting closer. Monroe's pulse raced as the squad retreated deeper into the labyrinth of the subway tunnels. The creature's guttural screeches echoed behind them, a sound that was etched into their minds. No matter how fast they ran, they could feel its presence just behind them, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Keep moving! Monroe barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The sound of their footsteps pounding on the concrete floor mingled with the distant echo of the creature's pursuit. We need to find a place to regroup. But there was nowhere to regroup in these tunnels. It was all just stone and steel, a maze designed to trap them. They had been running for what felt like hours, yet the walls seemed to close in tighter with every step. Dax, still reeling from the initial attack, stumbled forward, his breathing shallow. It's relentless. It won't stop chasing us. Reyes didn't look back as she sprinted ahead, her rifle raised. We can't let it corner us. If we stop, we're dead. Monroe's mind raced as he thought of their options. They had already passed the last visible exit signs, and there was no turning back now. They were running out of time, running out of options. The monster had already proven that it could outpace them, and its sheer size made it almost impossible to fight head-on. Then, a noise, a familiar sound, though distorted in the hollow silence of the tunnel, came from somewhere ahead. It wasn't a growl, nor a screech. It was mechanical. A clanging, as though something had been disturbed. What the hell is that? Bell murmured, a hint of hope creeping into his voice. Monroe gestured for them to stop, his eyes scanning the dark ahead. The noise came again, louder this time, like chains dragging across metal. But it wasn't just that, it was also rhythmic, almost methodical. We don't have time to check it out, Monroe said, his voice tight. Keep moving. But as they continued down the tunnel, the noise grew louder, until it was undeniable. There was something else down here with them. Something alive. Something familiar. Monroe's eyes flicked to the others, his heart pounding. Do you hear that? Yeah, Reyes said, slowing her pace. I hear it too. It's not just the creature. There's something else. They moved cautiously toward the sound, each step filled with dread. The further they went, the darker it became. The smell of mildew and decay was overwhelming now, and the air grew heavier with every breath they took. Suddenly, they rounded a corner, and there it was, a massive steel door, rusted and warped with age. The sound was coming from behind it. Monroe's heart skipped a beat. This is it. This has to be it. The door was heavy, but it didn't seem locked. It was as if it had been designed to keep something in, or to keep something out. Monroe didn't care which, as long as it gave them a chance to regroup. On 3, Monroe ordered. 1, 2, 3. With a grunt, the squad pushed the door open, revealing a large, dimly lit room. The noise they'd been hearing was coming from a series of large, mechanical machines. But the machines were nothing like anything Monroe had ever seen before. They were more like half-finished experiments, strange and cobbled together from various pieces of technology. Who built this? Bell whispered, his voice filled with awe. Monroe didn't answer. His eyes scanned the room for an escape route, but it was hard to see anything beyond the twisted machines. And then, they saw it. A figure standing in the far corner, partially obscured by shadows. It was human, at least, it had been. But now, it was something else entirely. Its limbs were twisted and reformed, covered in armor-like plating. Its eyes glowed an unnatural green. Monroe stepped forward cautiously. What the hell are you? The figure tilted its head, almost as if studying them. Then it spoke, its voice raspy but oddly calm. You shouldn't be here. Who are you? Monroe demanded again, his weapon raised, though he couldn't quite bring himself to fire. The figure's lips curled into something resembling a smile. I was once part of the research team. Now, I am something else. Reyes stepped forward. What is all this? What are these machines? The figure turned, its mechanical limbs creaking as it moved toward a large table covered with papers and broken equipment. These are the last remnants of humanity's attempt to survive. The infection didn't just spread, it evolved. We couldn't contain it. We thought we could, but it adapted. Adapted? Monroe echoed, his voice low with disbelief. How? The figure's green eyes flashed as it turned back toward them. The infected began to learn. They became more than just mindless creatures. They were engineered. Their new forms were designed to be controlled. But now, they control us. Monroe's stomach churned. You're telling me the infected were engineered? Yes. In a last-ditch effort, before the collapse, the figure continued. We thought we could create a weapon, a cure. But we only created monsters. Dax shook his head, confused. Then why are you still alive? The figure didn't answer at first. It simply looked at them, its expression unreadable. Because I was part of the team that created them. And now, I'm part of them. The squad stood in stunned silence. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was something far bigger, something far more dangerous. And it was clear that the squad wasn't just dealing with the infected anymore. They were dealing with something far worse. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder. The infected were close, closing in on them. Monroe's heart raced. We need to move. Now. But as they turned to flee, the figure raised a hand, a warning. You won't outrun them, it said quietly. Not anymore. The sound of the infected's footsteps echoed down the tunnel, growing nearer with every second. The group of soldiers, their backs pressed against the cold, steel walls of the room, exchanged fearful glances. Their earlier conversation with the twisted figure had only deepened the uncertainty that weighed heavily on them. They weren't just fighting mindless zombies anymore, they were facing something much darker, something they didn't fully understand. Monroe's mind raced. The squad had just learned that the infection was far more dangerous and insidious than they'd imagined. It was evolving, adapting, and that meant they were facing a relentless enemy. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't fight it head-on. Every strategy they had used so far was failing. Captain, Reyes whispered, her voice tense, we need to get out of here. If those things are really close. I know, Monroe replied, cutting her off. But where do we go? This place is a dead end. We're trapped. Belle's eyes darted around the room, scanning the dark corners. What about the exit we saw earlier? The one with the machinery? Monroe turned to him, brow furrowed. The entrance? That could be our way out. But the machines? Belle protested. What if they're more than just equipment? What if they're part of the thing we're trying to escape from? Monroe didn't have time to argue. He could hear the screeching sound of the infected growing louder by the second. If they didn't act soon, they'd be surrounded. Get to the machinery, Monroe ordered. If there's a chance, we'll take it. Without hesitation, the squad sprinted toward the far corner of the room, where strange machines lay strewn across the floor, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow. Dax reached the first of the machines and crouched next to it, his hands moving quickly as he tried to identify its purpose. This could be it, Dax muttered, working feverishly. If I can get this working, we might be able to overload the system. It could cause a chain reaction, take them all out. Reyes shook her head. You're sure? We don't have time to make mistakes. I'm not sure, Dax replied, his eyes glued to the panel in front of him. But it's our only shot. Behind them, the sound of the infected grew deafening, the rapid shuffling of feet and guttural growls filling the room. Monroe could feel the fear rising in his chest, but he forced it down, focusing on the task at hand. Keep them off us! Monroe shouted. He aimed his rifle at the doorway, preparing for the inevitable. Belle moved to the entrance of the room, aiming his weapon at the approaching threat. The infected poured into the hallway, a swarm of mindless, rotting bodies closing in on them. The sight was enough to send a chill down anyone's spine, pale, sunken eyes, gaping mouths, and grotesque limbs dragging them forward in an endless pursuit. Come on, Dax! Monroe shouted, his voice tight. We don't have much time. Dax's hands flew over the machine's control panel, sweat pouring down his face. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Dax slammed a button with his fist, and the machines hummed to life. Sparks flew from several of them, and the lights on the panels blinked erratically. Done! Dax yelled, stepping back quickly. We're about to find out if this works. The machines began to rumble, their metallic parts groaning under the pressure. For a moment, the room was filled with a low, ominous hum. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the machines released a wave of electrical energy, surging through the wires and sparking off the walls. The infected, who had been closing in on them from all sides, staggered. Some of them froze in place, their bodies twitching violently as the energy coursed through them. The others collapsed in a heap, their bodies spasming and twitching uncontrollably. "We did it!" Reyes shouted. "It's working." But Monroe wasn't so sure. The machines might have stopped the infected for now, but he knew they wouldn't stay down forever. Whatever control the infection had over them was still intact. They would rise again. "Don't get cocky," Monroe snapped. "We need to move." With the infected temporarily disabled, the squad made a break for the exit. But as they ran, Monroe couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The machines had given them a momentary advantage, but at what cost? Had they just triggered something far worse? Was it possible that the figure they'd encountered earlier was right, that they were all part of a bigger experiment? The hallway stretched on before them, empty and silent. But the feeling of being watched never left them. As they neared the exit, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the same creature they'd seen earlier, the one that had been part of the team that created the infected. But now, it looked different. Its eyes glowed a deep, sickly green, and its movements were more fluid, more deliberate. "You shouldn't have done that," the creature said, its voice cold and distant. "The machines were meant to keep you here, to keep you from escaping." Monroe raised his rifle, but the creature didn't flinch. "It's too late for you. You'll never make it out alive." Monroe gritted his teeth. "We'll see about that." Without warning, the creature lunged, faster than anything they had ever seen. Monroe barely had time to react as the creature's claws slashed through the air, grazing his side. He staggered back, but he didn't lose his footing. The squad opened fire, but the creature's skin seemed to absorb the bullets, its twisted form barely flinching. It was more than just an infected. It was something else, something human, and yet not. Monroe's heart pounded as the creature lunged again, its claws scraping against the floor like knives. He had no choice but to fight back. "Get to the exit," Monroe ordered, knowing they couldn't keep up this fight for long. With every ounce of strength he had, Monroe fired his weapon again, aiming for the creature's head. It howled in pain, but it didn't stop. The exit was so close, but so was the creature. And Monroe knew, deep down, that the real fight was only just beginning. Monroe's heart raced as the creature lunged toward him again, its claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. He could hear the rapid breathing of his squad mates, each one struggling to keep the monster at bay. It was unlike anything they had ever faced. The creature's glowing green eyes burned with a sinister intelligence that sent a chill through Monroe's spine. "Get to the exit," Monroe shouted again, firing off another round in an attempt to force the creature back. But the bullets seemed to have little effect. The thing's body absorbed them like water, and it didn't falter. If anything, it only seemed to grow more enraged. Bell, his eyes wide with panic, fired his rifle at the creature's legs, aiming for its joints in hopes of slowing it down. But the creature twisted, agile despite its grotesque size, avoiding the shots and snapping its jaws with terrifying speed. "We can't kill it," Dax shouted, ducking as the creature swung one of its monstrous limbs toward him. He stumbled backward, but managed to regain his balance. "It's invulnerable." "Then we fight differently," Monroe snapped, his grip tightening around his weapon. "We need to get it out of here, away from the exit." Reyes, taking the initiative, pulled a grenade from her belt and tossed it at the creature. The explosion was deafening, sending a shockwave through the corridor. Smoke billowed into the air, and for a moment, the creature seemed to disappear in the chaos. But as the smoke cleared, they saw it, the creature, still standing, its body charred and smoking, but still very much alive. Monroe's mind raced as he analyzed the situation. They couldn't outrun it, and they couldn't kill it. They were out of options. "Dax!" Monroe shouted, his eyes searching for the source of the machines. "Is there anything else we can use? Any way to trap it?" Dax, still panting from the frantic exchange, looked up, his expression grim. The machines, they were meant to hold something back. There's a containment grid beneath the floor. If we can activate it, we might be able to trap the creature. Reyes turned, already moving toward a panel on the far wall. Where's the control for it? Dax pointed, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. There, near the far corner. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got. Cover us. Monroe shouted, his voice sharp. Bell, Dax, with me. Reyes, get to that control panel and stay low. The squad moved in unison, ducking behind fallen debris as the creature roared, its eyes locked on them like a predator stalking its prey. Monroe gritted his teeth, his mind focused on the mission. There was no room for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. On my mark, Monroe muttered. We take the creature down, or we die trying. The creature's roar filled the air as it charged forward, its claws slicing through the concrete like butter. Bell fired again, forcing the creature to dodge, but it was only a brief distraction. Reyes reached the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. Sweat dripped down her brow as she typed commands, her eyes scanning the screen. She glanced up for a brief moment and saw the creature barreling toward her. Just a few more seconds, she shouted, desperation in her voice. Monroe turned back toward the creature, his gun raised. He fired, aiming for its face, but it barely flinched. He gritted his teeth and reached for the grenades on his belt. We'll have to do this the hard way. But before he could pull the pin on the grenade, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumbling sound vibrated through the floor, and suddenly, the containment grid beneath the creature's feet came to life. A series of metal walls shot up from the ground, enclosing the creature on all sides. The thing screeched in fury as it tried to claw its way out, but the grid held firm, the reinforced steel refusing to bend under its weight. Now! Monroe shouted. Reyes hit the final key, and the grid locked into place. A bright light flashed, and a low hum filled the room. The creature howled in fury, but it was trapped. It couldn't move, couldn't escape. It was confined within the walls of the containment area. The squad stood frozen, their breath shallow as they watched the creature's futile struggle. For the first time in what felt like forever, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate. We did it, Bell said, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Monroe, still breathing heavily, lowered his weapon. For now. It's not over yet. This place is a ticking time bomb. We need to get out before it explodes. The squad didn't waste any time. They turned toward the exit, moving quickly but cautiously, their eyes constantly scanning for any new threats. As they ran, Monroe couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping in. The creature had been contained for now, but what else was down here? What had they truly uncovered in this abandoned facility? The squad emerged from the tunnel into a large, open area, their surroundings eerily quiet. The distant hum of machinery filled the air, but other than that, there was no sign of life, no other survivors, no sign of the infection's spread. Where are we? Dax asked, his voice soft, as if afraid to break the silence. Monroe looked around, trying to make sense of the new surroundings. I don't know. But we can't stop now. We need to keep moving. As the squad moved further into the unknown, the shadows of the past seemed to close in on them, a constant reminder of the horrors they had faced, and the even greater horrors that still awaited them. Monroe knew they had survived the worst of it, but deep down, he understood that the nightmare was far from over. The infection wasn't just a plague, it was a force, evolving, adapting, and changing in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. But one thing was certain, they weren't going to stop fighting. The squad moved through the eerie silence, their footsteps echoing across the empty facility. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every creak of the floorboards a reminder that they were never truly alone. Monroe's mind raced, replaying every moment of the past few hours. The containment grid had held, but for how long? How long before whatever dark force that had created the infection found another way to break free? As they walked deeper into the heart of the facility, the once promising feeling of escape began to fade. The walls around them were covered in strange symbols, faded writing, and what appeared to be bloodstains, though no one dared to speculate whether it was human or something else. Monroe glanced over at his squad. Reyes was tense, her eyes scanning the surroundings as though expecting an ambush at any moment. Bell kept a steady pace beside her, though his hand was never far from his sidearm. Dax, ever the technician, fiddled with a small device in his hands, trying to make sense of whatever data he could pull from the outdated tech. "Where are we going?" Bell asked, his voice low but urgent. Monroe didn't look at him. "We're looking for answers. This place holds the key to everything. The creature, the machines, the infection, it all ties together. We need to understand what's going on before it spreads any further." The further they walked, the more the unsettling sensation grew, an oppressive weight in the air, a feeling of being watched. Monroe's instincts screamed at him, but there was no clear source of danger. The facility was cold, abandoned, and its silence was deafening. But in that silence, something else stirred. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the jaws of a trap. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, sending a shiver through the group. Monroe raised a hand, signaling them to stop. The vibration continued, growing stronger, almost like a low hum emanating from somewhere deep within the complex. "Do you feel that?" Dax asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I feel it," Monroe replied, his gaze fixed ahead. "And I don't like it." The tremor intensified, and with it, the walls seemed to pulse, as if the building itself were alive. A deep, guttural sound reverberated from below them, followed by a series of mechanical clicks that filled the air. Then, an ominous whirring noise echoed from the distance, something coming to life, something big. "What the hell is that?" Reyes muttered, her hand tight around her weapon. Monroe clenched his jaw. "Whatever it is, it's not good." They pressed forward, moving cautiously as the noise grew louder. It was coming from a large, heavily secured door at the end of the hall. The door was made of thick steel, reinforced by several layers of what appeared to be electrified barriers. But the most disturbing part was the massive, rusted keyhole in the center, something that clearly hadn't been touched in years. Without a word, Monroe motioned for the squad to take cover. He slowly approached the door, his mind racing. What could be behind it? The sound they had heard was unmistakably mechanical, but it felt unnatural. Whatever lay on the other side was not just a threat, it was the origin of everything they had encountered. Dax stepped forward, his eyes locked on the keypad beside the door. "This might take a while," he said, his fingers already moving over the panel. "It's encrypted, but I think I can override it." Monroe kept his eyes on the hallway, his senses on high alert. The rumbling noise from below had stopped, but that didn't mean they were out of danger. In fact, it felt like the calm before the storm. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Monroe's mind raced, imagining every possible outcome. What if they opened this door only to find something worse than the creature they had just trapped? What if the facility had been preparing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated? "Dax, hurry up," Monroe urged. "I'm trying." Dax shot back, sweat dripping down his face as he worked. "This system is ancient, but it's holding up. Just a few more." A sudden burst of static broke the tension, coming from the comm device on Monroe's wrist. The voice that crackled through the speakers sent a chill down his spine. "This is the director. You shouldn't have come here. The experiment is still ongoing. If you want to survive, turn back now." Monroe's grip tightened on his weapon. "The director," he muttered. "What the hell is going on here?" The voice on the comm continued, more sinister now. "You are not the first to come looking for answers. But you will be the last. Leave now, or you will become part of the experiment. There's no escaping what we've created." Monroe's pulse quickened, and his instincts screamed at him to run. But he couldn't back down now. Not after everything they had fought for. Not when they were so close to understanding the truth. "Dax, you have to get that door open. Now," Monroe barked. Dax nodded, his fingers flying over the console with renewed urgency. Finally, with a satisfying beep, the door's security system unlocked, and the massive door slowly creaked open. The room beyond was dark, filled with shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The hum of machinery, once distant, now surrounded them, vibrating through the floor and the walls. They stepped inside, their weapons raised, prepared for anything. But what they found was something they hadn't expected. In the center of the room was a massive tank, its glass panels cracked and stained with years of neglect. Inside, suspended in a strange, greenish liquid, was the body of a man, or what had once been a man. His skin was pale, stretched tight over bones, his eyes sunken and lifeless. But the most terrifying part was the wires and tubes that ran into his body, connecting him to the machines surrounding him. This is the origin," Monroe whispered, stepping closer. Suddenly, the body twitched. The man, or whatever he was, stirred, his eyes snapping open. A low, raspy breath escaped his lips, and the room filled with the sounds of mechanical whirring. The figure's mouth parted, and in a voice that was both human and inhuman, it spoke. "Welcome to the end." Before Monroe could react, the ground beneath them trembled again, and the machines around the room came to life. The doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The final stand had just begun. To be continued. This concludes your story. Would you like to start a new one or modify any part of this one?